Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back for another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have everyone that could see the obvious signs of this, and that's a post from CH4Locks, and that's a post from the Age Like Wine subreddit. It looks like a tweet from Gun Owners of America, who tweeted, at AG Pambani is creating a registry of gun owners, and that was them quote tweeting themselves. Breaking, AG Pambani is convinced a federal judge to order at 2AFND to turn over a list of its members. And yeah, personally, I like Gun Owners of America. They're kind of a more principled NRA. The NRA is kind of is good too, but they're kind of in the GOP's pocket a little bit more than the GOA is. But regardless, it just goes to show you the GOP might market itself as the pro-gun party compared to the Democrats, and that might be true. But regardless, it just they're pretty much two sides of the same coin. I'm sure if it was a Democrat president saying, "Oh, we need a registry of gun owners," Reddit would think it's the greatest thing ever. But since it's a Republican, instead they're just going to call them out for their hypocrisy, and they're 100% right. Just because the Republican Party loves to market itself as this pro-freedom, pro-gun party. But, in reality, they're just the Democrats from 10 years ago at this point, pretty much. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Libertarian Hell, posted by What About the 90s, and they said, the Trump administration is nothing close to being libertarian. The only real libertarian aspect was Doge, but it was done haphazardly. The border control is just an excuse to violate people's rights. I could go on and on. How are these people claiming to be libertarian that support Trump? If I remember correctly, Trump was booed out of the building at the Libertarian National Commission. We asked for the nomination. What's going on? And yeah, personally, I would agree with that. Trump might kind of market himself as being libertarian, and he might be more libertarian than Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, but that doesn't make him libertarian. I think he's about as libertarian as Barack Obama and Joe Biden were, which is to say, not at all, kind of pseudo-libertarian, rights for the in-group, not for the out-group, and that's very much how he is. If he wants to call himself libertarian and libertarians and people want to support him when he calls himself libertarian, that's fine. Call yourself whatever you want to. But I personally don't find him to be that libertarian. I find him to be just another tyrant and that's been pretty much par for the course since FDR at this point in regards to the presidents. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have CBP enforces binary sex codes and enhanced U.S. passport validation, APIS, posted from GT Law, InsideBusinessImmigration.com, posted by EmptyRow5585. And yeah, personally, I can find a lot of complaints about CBP and the whole U.S. Border control and immigration policy, but them enforcing binary sex codes probably isn't one of the biggest one of them. That's very much where Reddit is at this point. They'll always find the stupidest hills to die on, especially in regards to all the transgender shit. If you want to be transgender, that's completely fine. Identify as whatever you want to. Other people shouldn't be forced to accept how you identify, and that includes the government. If they want to enforce binary sex codes, that's on them. Personally, I think there's a lot of better things you could be going after than just saying, "Oh, ZBB enforces binary sex code." But regardless, if you want to identify as transgender, that's fine. But I was told that gender and sex are different for years, and now the woke leftists here are complaining about binary sex codes, and that just goes to show you that they're always going to move the goalpost in regards to that subject. Personally, I don't care. You identify as whatever you want. Identify as a Pikachu if you want to. I don't care. But that doesn't mean you have to say that you're actually a Pikachu. But just believe whatever you want about yourself. But that doesn't mean other people should be forced to believe it. And yeah, if you want to think you can you can change your biological sex, or if you're a third biological sex, that's fine. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to. Some organizations are still going to have binary sex codes, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Tennessee man arrested, gets $2 million bond for posting Facebook meme, posted Trump quote about shooting at school, from Reason.com, posted by CH4Locks. And yeah, personally, I don't think that's very good, but Reddit only cares about authoritarianism when it's the out group. going after the in-group. If the in-group does the exact same thing to the out-group, Reddit thinks it's completely fine. Case in point, the Biden administration went after a guy for a meme about texting to vote for Hillary, but as per usual, Reddit only cares about authoritarianism when the out-group does it. And that just goes to show you, I'm sure that if this was if this man posted about a Biden quote about shooting at a school that went against the narrative, and the feds did the exact same thing, Reddit would think it's the greatest thing ever. But since it's Trump, it's the worst thing ever. And it just goes to show you, Reddit only cares about tyranny when it has the wrong letter next to its name. They were completely fine with any of Joe Biden's tyranny, but the second the orange man gets back in office, suddenly and all of his tyranny is the worst thing ever. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Democrats are going to run Maine Governor Janet Mills, 77 years old, against Susan Collins in 2026 instead of Graham Plattner, 40 years old, a much more progressive candidate, oyster farmer, who is calling for Medicare for all, taxes on billionaires, and affordable housing, posted by Donald Key, and that's a cross post from the Boomers Being Fools subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think, the Democrats should be able to run whoever they want to, but, personally, I don't think the party really has too much of a clear vision at this point. On one side you got the old neoliberals like Janet Mills, who are pretty much already in the retirement home, if not in the grave. And on the other side you got these young progressives, basically marked like Zoran Mamdani and this Graham Plattner here, who are like these pretty much socialist, communist, Marxist, whatever you want to call them, who that's not too popular as well. So, personally, if the Democrats can run whoever they want to, but I think they need to find someone who appeals to people, and increasingly, they either find these dinosaurs who are out of touch with the current political landscape, or these younger people by comparison, who want to resurrect the Soviet Union, and that's just to show you that it's personally, I think the party is after 2 centuries might be on its way out. And yeah, personally, I think I think it's time to give up the branding of Democratic Party, maybe because of course a lot of Democrats these days don't like the first Democrat and President Andrew Jackson. They think he was a racist slave owner, which I guess by today's standards he was, but by the standards of like the 1820s, it was probably a bit more typical. But regardless, if I were the Democrats, I'd rebrand to something like the Progressive Party, or just get rid of the party and just maybe have it replaced by like the Socialist Party and the Centrist Party or something. Because the Democrats currently really have a very loose coalition that's just almost impossible to maintain. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have The Wrong Lizard Might Get In, posted by Fear the Creeper, from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. An extraterrestrial robot and spaceship has just landed on Earth. The robot steps out of the spaceship. I come in peace, it said, adding after a long moment of fervor grinding, take me to your lizard. Ford Prefect, of course, had an explanation for this. I sat far from watching non-stop forensic news reports on television, none of which had anything to say about other than record the thing that had done almost amount of damage, was valued by the amount of billions of pounds, and it killed the total other number of people. And say it again, because the robot was doing nothing more than standing there, saying very slightly and emitting short, incomprehensible arrow messages. It comes from a very ancient democracy, you see. You mean it comes from a world of lizards? No, said Ford, who by this time was a little more rational and coherent than he had been, having finally had the coffee forced down him. Nothing so simple, nothing about like so short. In this world, the people are people, the lizard eaters are lizards, the people hate the lizards, and the lizards rule the people. Odd, said Arthur, I thought you said it was a democracy. I did, said Ford, it is. So, said Arthur, hoping he wasn't sounding ridiculously obtuse, why don't people get rid of the lizards? It honestly doesn't occur to them, says Ford. They've all got the vote, so they all pretty much assume that the government they voted in more or less approximates the government they want. I mean, they actually vote for the lizards? Oh yes, says Ford with a shrug, of course. But, says Arthur, got going for the big one again. Why? Because if they didn't vote for a lizard, says Ford, the wrong lizard might get in. Got any gen? What? I said Ford, with increasingly air of urgency creeping into his voice. Have you got any gen? Oh look, tell me about the lizards. Ford shrugged again. Some people say that lizards are the best thing that ever happened to them, he said. They're completely wrong, of course, completely and utterly wrong, but somehow someone's got to say it. That's terrible, said Arthur. Listen, bud, said Ford, if I had $1 Altarian for every time I heard every one bit of the universe look at another bit of the universe and say that's terrible, I'd be sitting here like a lemon looking for gen. And I guess I would agree with that passage. Personally, I would agree that we're ruled by pretty much lizard people who who only have their own best interest at heart. But of course, Reddit will if will say, oh, if that lizard person has an R next to their name, they're literally the worst. They're literally Hitler. But if they have a D next to their name, well, they're the lesser of two evils. You might as well vote for them instead. And yeah, personally, that just goes to show you that people will just vote for whatever they feel pretty much the letter next to their name rather than the actual candidate, and that's very much where we're at right now. It reminds me of the Simpsons Halloween special from 1996 where Bob Dole and Bill Clinton get replaced by aliens, and it's like, oh, and then they reveal to be aliens, and like, what are you going to do? Vote for a party? It's a two-party system, and that's very much how it goes to show you how people are going to vote for whoever they one of the major parties, regardless of even if they're genocidal alien maniacs, and it doesn't really matter what else happens, as long as they have the correct letter next to their name, they'll just keep voting for him. And yeah, that's very much how I feel about it. They'll always vote for the lizard person with the right letter next to their name rather than vote for based on principle. It's always going to be lesser of two evils. Vote blue no matter who. Vote red or you're dead. And that's very much how American politics works. Then we have Donald Trump and White House busted using Florida DHS palm tree footage to show chaos in Chicago. Clown car fascists, in parentheses, from the dailybeast.com, posted by CH4Locks, and that's crosspost from the Fuck the Alt-Right subreddit. And yeah, personally, I don't think, I don't really care for government surveillance like this DHS palm tree footage, but, or they're misrepresenting, I guess, they're saying, oh, this is happening in Chicago, when in reality it's not actually happening. But, ultimately the government's always going to try and get the narrative across, and that's true regardless of which branch of the Uniparty is in power. There's another comment I made recently in the Libertarian Party USA sub. It was a post about Donald Trump saying, one is compared to Latin American dictator. One is a tax and spend profligate. One buys up controlling stakes in national companies. One believes in price controls, and the other is Latin American dictator. And I say in response, you really wonder what Red's going to do when it no longer has the orange man to go after. Of course, there's going to be a new boogeyman, looking like it will be J.D. Vance currently, but might change. But Red has spent all this time building up Trump as this unique evil, when in reality is much more par for the course. And that's very much how I feel about this. Red's always going to say, oh, Donald Trump's literally the worst thing ever. Well, I remember back in the 2000s when it was George W. Bush, and I'm sure in the next decade it'll be someone else as well, Red, you can keep building up all these boogeymen and keep saying how bad they are, but, ultimately you're just going to code through their term and we'll move on to the next boogeyman. And it's the same kind of with the Republicans as well. I remember it was Barack Obama used to be the boogeyman, then it was Joe Biden. And yeah, ultimately, it just goes to show you nothing will ever change as long as it's just in-group versus out-group politics, team-based politics, rather than politics based on actual principle. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have violent Antifa criminals terrorizing more ravaged Portland, posted by CDN History Student. And that's how it looks like a bunch of people in frog suits standing up against National Guard members. And one of them looks like they have a sign, Frogs Together Strong. And yeah, personally, I think that's kind of Redditors LARPing in real life rather than actually doing anything. I remember when Pepe the Frog was the big meme, and Reddit said, oh, Pepe the Frog is literally fascism, but then they start doing a frog meme, and suddenly it's democracy. It just goes to show you, they have no values other than in-group good and out-group bad. Next we have what lack of competition looks like, posted by Fast Seaworthiness 739. That's crosspost from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit, and it says U.S. healthcare expenditures, and then it's a CPI on the bottom, and it's a red line, it's just straight on zero, and then it says national health expenditures around billions, and it's the blue line, it keeps going up and up and up. And yeah, personally, I think that's very much why the government shouldn't have a monopoly on healthcare. Personally, I think if people want the government to pay for their healthcare and they want to earmark their taxpayer dollars for that, I think they should be able to. But I think the libertarian position is the healthcare should be a free market. If you want private industry to do it, you should be able to spend your money on that. If you want the government to spend, if you want to give you the government money to do it, you should be able to do that. Ultimately, it should be like everything else, a free market where you can justify sending your resources wherever you like to, rather than where you're forced to only use the government. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have the U.S. military is helping Arab dictatorships run psyops from Reason.com, posted by Jedi Porcupine. And yeah, that's not too surprising for me. The U.S. government and military always like to interfere in foreign countries and try and control the narrative there. But Russia does that here, and Reddit can't shut up about it, even though it's probably not even to the level that the U.S. does in other countries. And it just goes to show you, Reddit will go after whatever boogeyman they're told to go after. It was Russia. Now it looks like they're increasingly pushing Qatar. When in reality, I would say Israel's probably the biggest influence over the U.S. compared to compared to Russia and Qatar. But Reddit, for its credit, does actually go after Israel a little bit of the time. But they'll really go after whoever the media says to go after, and that's my thoughts on that issue. And next we have Czech quote-unquote Libertarian Party gains 2 seats under an electoral coalition of SPD, National Conservative Social Democratic Party, posted by USMBF, and they added, this subreddit is mostly about American politics, which is a shame. That there's a lot of interesting things happening outside of the U.S. It's going to be very hard for a non-Czech speaker to learn about what exactly happened in Czech elections a few days ago. Essentially, Czech member party of the International Alliance of Libertarian Parties, Svobodny, has campaigned under a legally secret electoral coalition led by SPD, which also includes Pro and Tricolor. The wiki articles both parties are semi-accurate, and none of the parties except Svobodny has really shown any interest in advocating for free markets in their programs or in practice, even if the wiki page says they have. SPD, Pro, and Tricolor have employed significantly populistic tactics. SPD members are ex-members of a now essentially dysfunctional Social Democratic Party, Socialdem, and all mentioned parties, except Svobodny, have historically advocated for expansion of the welfare state, economic nationalism, intrusive economic interventionism, social conservatism, violation of property rights, and EU legal protectionism. Now, this situation is basically very much akin to what happened with the U.S. Libertarian Party and the Republican Party during the presidential elections 2024. The idea that if you compromise and just go into a coalition for lesser evil, you will, quote-unquote, change things, is pragmatic and realistic after all, right? Well, Svobodny's decision to join the SPD-led coalition's role in the creation of a splinter party, Voluntia, and significantly member losses of the Svobodny side, but has guaranteed them 2 seats in the Czech Chamber of Deputies, equivalent to Congress. The explicit cost, except a party member exodus of the 2 seats in the Chamber of Deputies, so far has been no after-election funds for Svobodny, and all the Svobodny candidates were under the secret SPD-led electoral coalition, meaning all funds will legally have to go to SPD and no other party. It also means that if those 2 Svobodny politicians got recalled or leave or something happens to them, they will not be replaced by a Svobodny member party, but by an SPD party member. Another magnificent cost of the 2 seats has been compromising libertarian beliefs and cooperating with pro-Russian, anti-free market, anti-individual rights, pro-economic interventionism, pro-protectionism, and economic nationalism, anti-reason, brutally populistic parties. On top of that, SPD will with 99% certainty enter a government coalition with ANO, which is a Big Ten ideologyless party that keeps shifting its position depending on what is currently popular with the voters, essentially buying them with empty, insane promises, deficit spending, handouts, and public and social programs. If you're willing to do a lot of translating, you can look into these programs, SPD Road 2025 elections, and I linked to an article about it. Svobodny Learn Party Program, linked to an article about it. The 2 programs are essentially completely incompatible, but more so, SPD's program is fundamentally immoral and unjustified. So if you ever some way see this man on the internet or elsewhere, remember that he sold out Liberty for a nice little chair in the parliament, an equivalent of 50 or 100 USD per month. And that was, I guess, linked to the politician who is the chair of the party, the Svobodny party he was talking about, Libor von Vrsic. And yeah, personally, I think the libertarian position is, if you want to compromise for liberty, that's fine, but that's very much a lot of politics does require compromise, but I think the libertarian position is you shouldn't compromise. Compromise also is often just compromising your rights away, and this is a good example of that. If people want to form coalitions and vote for the lesser of 2 evils, they should be able to, but the libertarian position is, we shouldn't be compromising. We should be standing steadfast by the principles of liberty rather than selling out to the lesser of 2 evils, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Tough Choice, posted by Fasty Ruviness 739. That's crosswords they made from the anarcho-capitalism subreddit, and it looks like a picture of that Leah Thomas and Riley Gaines and they said the person on the right has to deal with time for 5th place in a college swim meet, or all Americans get higher prices on all goods, military marches in many cities, many legal residents get arrested for no reason, we have less free trade. Which do you pick? And yeah, personally, I don't like how they always use, this 5th place straw man against Riley Gaines. She was just the most outspoken advocate against Leah Thomas. Leah Thomas did win some races against all biological women, but Reddit only cares about Riley Gaines, and she's the most vocal about how she was robbed. But regardless, I do kind of agree with their general point. We shouldn't have to deal with trans women, biological males in women's sports, but and then also have to deal with all the other shit that comes with it, like higher prices on goods from the tariffs, military marches in many states, many illegal residents arrested for no reason, less free trade. We should have to. We should have. It should be going on a case-by-case basis, I would say. And that's very much why I think the NCAA, since it's pretty much government-run, that's a big problem when it comes to, having trans women in women's sports, because, the Democrats will bend to the woke on every issue, and that's one of them. Well, in reality, I think, most people, even most Democrats are against it, and it just goes to show you that, these big tent political parties aren't working. We need to sound these things on these case by case basis. I think if a private sports organization wants to have trans women compete with biological women, that's fine. But I think a lot of people are against that. And Reddit always says, well, if you're against that, you're a bigot. And it just goes to show you that Reddit will just label anyone who dissents all a bigot, fascist, Nazi, etc., etc. And yeah, I think the libertarian position is, handled on a case-by-case basis, just like all the other issues. But right now we have a big tent political forced collectivist system where everyone has to have where one guy pretty much gets to make decisions regarding every single policy, and I don't think that's the right answer from a libertarian perspective. I think the libertarian perspective, is individual government rather than forced collectivist government. People want to form voluntary collectives, so I think that's fine. But right now we have forced collectivist government where one guy and his party pretty much get to decide all the policies, and I think the libertarian position is everyone should decide for themselves what policies they can and don't want to support, and that's my thoughts on that issues. Next, we have censorship rising from TheGuardian.com, posted by Help Fleeting, and that article says U.S. news outlets refuse to sign new Pentagon rules to report only official information. And yeah, personally, I do think the Pentagon, if they do want to keep information private, that's on them. Personally, I do think, if they some stuff probably should be kept private, like, if they're planning any, secret attacks or anything, I don't know. But ultimately, the government's going to want to keep some stuff private, and I guess that's understandable. Personally, I think the government should try and be transparent as possible. But, ultimately, if anyone wants to keep secrets, I think they should be able to, and that does include the government. So that's my thoughts on that issue. And yeah, so I wouldn't really call that censorship. I'd call that more, I guess anti-transparent, but I don't know if I necessarily call that censorship. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think we have a new tweet. How many times will CAA try this? Will CAA try the same thing, expect a different result? And that's looks like a cartoon. It's a hippie with a California Republic shirt, flag, and it says progressive policies, and he's hammering himself with it. It's a hammer, and it says cost of living crisis breaking point. And I agree with that cartoon. Personally, and they added vote and share if you think CA will try something different. They were the guys who posted that Libertarian Party post earlier. So it's this Cultural Cupcake 707. Looks like kind of the cartoon in the same style. Maybe it's AI, I don't know. But yeah, I would agree with it that it just progressive policies might sound good in theory, but just because it sounds good in theory doesn't mean it works in practice. It's very much like communism. It sounds good in theory, but in practice you get tyrants like Stalin and Mao, and that's very much how progressivism works, I would say. And that's my thoughts on that issue. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.